We want to thank everybody, first of all, for joining us. We know there's a lot going on and everybody's really busy. So we just want to express our appreciation for taking some time to engage with us and share this with us. And we know that some of our, even our own, weren't able to be here just because we have a lot going on. Everybody kind of does. So we are going to make sure we record this, and we'll send out a link to the meeting, and we'll have that so that we can share it in the future. So again, thank you so much for being here. We are the Utah Safety Council's Women in Safety organization, and we are doing our webinar this morning. We have a special guest, and then we're going to talk a little bit about our organization and what's coming up in the next year. So I want to give most of our time to our guests. So I'm gonna just remind everybody. I don't think you're allowed. We've turned off everybody's cameras, but the chat is working, and we are going to do a Q&A. So feel free to submit questions, and we'll kind of watch for those, and we'll ask those as things go on and the meeting progresses. So feel free to do that if anything pops into your mind. So with that, I'm going to introduce our guest and I kind of explain a little bit about how it came about. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but I had one of my coworkers, Megan, who's helping me out today. Thank you, Megan. She told me about a webinar that the Department of Labor was doing, and I thought it would be a good idea to log in and watch it. And I learned so much about the Women's Bureau, and they've been around for 100 years and what they've done. And I was very inspired, and I thought it was really interesting. And so I wanted to share that with everybody, and wanted you guys to hear a little bit about it, because they're kind of the original women's group for workers. So I wanted to have that experience with you guys and have that shared. So I reached out to their director on LinkedIn, which is so cool that you can just reach out to people these days. But her team got back to me, and they were amazing and nice and wonderful. And we're excited to help set this up. So we have today with us Dr. Laurie Todd-Smith, and she's the director of the Women's Bureau for the Department of Labor. I don't want to get too much into it. I'll let her introduce that, and then I will share some links so you guys can look into it further after the call. But the Women's Bureau develops policies and standards and conducts inquiries to safeguard the interests of working women and to advocate for their equality and economic security for themselves and for their families, and to promote quality work environments. And so that's right along the lines of what we do. And so I was really excited to hear that. So Dr. Laurie Todd-Smith is their director, and she's going to speak with us. I believe she started a year ago. It's been, I'm sure it's been a lovely year, very challenging. So I'll let her talk about that, but I'll give the floor to her, and we'll be able to ask her questions at the end. So thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited that you're here.
Thank you for having me.
We're happy to have you. Go ahead. Thank you.
Great. You can hear me okay?
Yeah, everything's good.
Good. Well, thank you so much. It's so nice to be here today. I really enjoy my job, but I think my favorite part so far in the year is working with states. So I'm just thrilled to be part of this conversation today. And thanks to Lisa for reaching out and being on that Women Equality Day webinar. It's just so nice to hear feedback too, that it meant something to somebody. So thank you for that. And I got several remarks or emails that day following that event asking for more information. And so when you think about an organization like the Women's Bureau, has been around for 100 years, and a lot of people don't know what we do. So that's something I'm really trying to change, and have been doing many more webinars since then. So thank you for reaching out. I really appreciate it. I think by way of background, it's important for you to know that my background's really in education and workforce development. I worked as a teacher for many years, as a researcher for many years, and then served as the education policy advisor to the governor in the state of Mississippi for the last 8 years. So I approach a lot of the things that I do at the Women's Bureau through the lens of education and I think a lot more about young women in middle school and high school and their desires and careers in terms of next steps after high school. So brings together a whole interesting perspective. I'm also very passionate about early childhood education, which all of us that are mothers understand how complex it can be in caring for children or young children or school-age children right now as we also try to work. So you'll hear some of those themes in my remarks today. But I do want to talk about, and you touched on it, the Women's Bureau is the only federal agency that is tasked with representing the needs of working women. And it is the only job in the entire federal government where it is actually required that the director of the agency be a woman. So I'm pretty honored to be in this role, representing the Bureau during this time. We were formed 100 years ago, just 2 months before the ratification of the 19th Amendment. And that formalized the work that was already happening at the Department of Labor under a separate bureau. So we're celebrating our 100-year centennial year this year, and we've had events all year long. And as you mentioned, under a pandemic, event planning became something very different this year for us. We held several virtual events, but one that I want to point in your direction, and maybe you could send it to your team later. It would be so fitting for you all to see. The Women's Bureau nominated Rosie the Riveter for our Hall of Honor at Department of Labor this year. And not just the iconic poster of Rosie the Riveter, but actually the women who were the Rosies, who worked in manufacturing and all different types of trades during World War II. These women are all in their 90s now. We were able to interview several, I think we have 4 or 6 on the video. And I really think this group in particular would really enjoy hearing their stories and what it was like to be a woman welder during that time. And these women, it brings tears to your eyes. I feel like singing God Bless America when I watch these women on the video. So I'll send that to you. It's rather lengthy. You can fast forward to the Rosie's parts, but I really think you would enjoy seeing it. And I'll have Erica or Andrea send that on your way. But I learned about the Women's Bureau when I was in Mississippi as an education and workforce advisor to the governor. And the Women's Bureau did many stakeholder engagement meetings across the United States, and Mississippi was one of their stops. They came to talk about military spouses. So I was representing Governor Bryant in this meeting with the Women's Bureau, and we know that 92% of military spouses are women, and they brought to my attention at the time occupational licensing standards and how difficult it can be from moving from one state to the next for a military spouse and getting reciprocity for their licenses. Well, because of the role I was in learning more about how a dental hygienist who was in the meeting had to wait 3 years to get the reciprocity on her license, in the state of Mississippi, we thought that was absolutely ridiculous. And that led to some really good reform in the occupational licensing space in the state I was in at the time. So I Googled everything I could about the Women's Bureau after that. I'm like, wait a minute, I didn't know there was a bureau. So that was my introduction. And then I continued to work with others at the White House, Ivanka Trump in particular, who really raised the flag, if you will, on childcare and women's issues in terms of workforce. And so that led to many more meetings and ultimately me being appointed to serve as the director. So I'm very honored. I think October 28th of this month will be my 1-year anniversary, and what a whirlwind it has been. So that's kind of the basics about me. There's certainly more, but I'll stop there. But what I really want to share with you that I think you'll be interested in is a little bit of history. So if you'll bear with me, I am going to have to look at these remarks on my screen, but I really think it's important because what you all do fits so well with the start of the Women's Bureau. So little history lesson for you. And in thinking about 100 years, I've been looking back at publications of the very first director of the Women's Bureau and other entities. So our earliest publications on the working conditions of women were focused mostly on the safety and well-being of women as they entered the labor force during World War I, known as the Great War. So conscription effectively removed 2 million American men out of the workforce and into the Army in 1917 and 1918 to reinforce Allied forces in Europe. So after the successes of the 100 Days Offensive, the swift end of the war, there was a third wave of a flu pandemic in 1920 that killed nearly 700,000 Americans. But in general, this really Americans really identified and valued individual lives more, including those of women. Everything was uplifted during that time. So in 1910, there were 5 million women were working, and by 1920, that number was 8 million, representing 20% of the workforce. So I'm going to give some numbers a little later on here about us being almost 50% of the workforce now. But in 1920, women were about 20% of the workforce, which much of that growth was being made in the second decade. So by 1920, a little later, 2.5 million women were working in manufacturing, trade, transportation, and public service. So the Women's Bureau really was founded in safety and consideration of working conditions, and all the articles I could find were about working conditions of women during this time and how the needs of women were very distinct from the needs of working men. And I may be reading more into it, but I also think with Congress forming the Women's Bureau in 1920, just 2 months before we had the right to vote, and we became the voice of women. Congress members knew they were going to have all new constituents. They didn't know what women constituents necessarily needed or thought, or Women's Bureau personnel, I think, felt more comfortable. Women workers spoke to them more often. So we were sort of the sharing of information about what women needed in the workforce. So there was an informal group already within DOL. There was a director of women in industry and service. This was before the Women's Bureau started. Her name was Mary Van Kleck, and she had regular correspondence. So things that I was reading about her correspondence with the War Labor Policies Board, she was relating the challenges that women faced in the industry. So she was also representing children. If you think about child labor, some of these quotes might surprise you. In this example I want to read to you, she appears to be saying, and because we only have this correspondence, I can only sort of guess this is what she meant, but it's limited in its access. But she quotes about the contracts amended on behalf of the federal contractors. And the quote says, "The contractor shall not employ in the performance of this contract any minor under the age of 14 years or permit any minor between the ages of 14 and 16 to work more than 8 hours in any one day, more than 6 days in any one week, or before 6 a.m. or after 7 p.m., unquote. So this makes me think about how far we've really come in the American dream, and not just for women, but also for children. Can you imagine in your fields right now, a bunch of 14 to 16-year-olds working with heavy industry and war productions? So can you imagine that as a woman in safety, just thinking about the difference in culture of how American has prospered, and we don't really live in a time where 14 and 16-year-olds are expected to work 48 hours a week. So a huge difference in how our world has evolved. But before Miss Van Kleck went to, she really took great pains to sort of clip information in industrial accidents. So one news clip that I found The quote is that there was a belt running from a motor to a finishing machine broke, and one girl, her name was Elizabeth Kovac, she was 17 years old, sustained a fractured skull, which resulted in her death an hour later, while several other girls were slightly injured. This is really terrible. It's not clear to me what paper it ran in, but what is clear is that it wasn't even a front page news story. It was listed as a small advertisement under a hair dye advertisement in the paper. But the response to the incident that was our predecessor started making safety visits to the plant. And much of the future of the Department of Labor agency came from the commitment to improving safety standards for women because we were elevating those topics. So as I look back at Miss Van Kleck and all that she was working on to help women in professional roles in the field of safety, I also think about you all and being part of the legacy of what I'm doing right now. It should make everyone feel really proud that not just now, but how far women have come in 100 years, but how far our country has come in establishing formal, non-government institutions that now focus on safety needs of American workers. So we did work on the focus and safety. That it wasn't just as World War I ended, but we advocated in the 1920s for the standard hours of employment, like an 8-hour working day with weekends off. Women tended to be heavily employed in manufacturing jobs at the time, and these jobs were found to be fast-paced, complex, monotonous, and loud is what I read. So for those reasons, the Women's Bureau found it important to advocate for an 8-hour workday as opposed to the 14 to 15-hour shifts that were normal at that time. In 1934, the Women's Bureau released a report that advocated for more safer regulations for household employees like housekeepers and servants, and setting minimum wage hours, setting hours, allowing time off, and improving the living conditions for all employees. In 1939, we released a report that called for better labor standards for women who were entering more manufacturing jobs. Again, it worked on wages, working conditions, union-employer relationships. So there's a theme in the readings of the Women's Bureau over time that we were consistently working on trying to help improve these conditions for women. In the 1940s, the Women's Bureau released a series of 19 bulletins making recommendations for women in the war program, again, advocating for labor standards about lifting and carrying heavy equipment, safe clothing such as hats and shoes, and access to bathroom facilities. Nighttime work, they were advocating for farming, housing, part-time wages. And then between 1950s and 1965, we made less explicit policy recommendations, but we focused on these broad themes of occupational health and safety policies. In 1952, we released a bulletin, number 240, that was the maternity protection of employed women. And that reiterated standards for pregnant women that started in 1942. But these standards included that women should not work for 6 weeks before and 2 months after delivery of a baby, and that pregnant women should avoid employment in occupations involving lifting, balancing, continued standing, and contact with poisonous substances of any kind. So it's just fascinating to read through these policies that are normal to us in these days and how they came about during these times. In the 1950s and 60s, we released a handbook on women workers. This included, again, recommendations for wages and hours and leave time. All of those things were included. And in regards to health and safety, we made recommendations for healthy working conditions for women, adequate ventilation, lighting, heating, provision for facilities. I see washrooms, toilets, and restrooms mentioned in all of this. It must have been not accessible for us to keep reiterating how important that was, and access to drinking water and lunchrooms. So you'll see how much, as I've talked about, but can you imagine a world that women safety advocates wanted special prohibitions for women working on a night shift. In today's world, that prohibition would be considered discriminatory, but there's a lot of things that we had to advocate for that are commonplace now. So it's progress, but it also shows our social morals as a country and culture as reflected in the workplaces. So today, women make up 80 million women are in the workforce, and that represents 47% of America's workers. We know these numbers are changing as we speak with the pandemic, but last year we tied the 67-year record low unemployment rate for women in late December, in which women held more than 50% of the jobs available in the United States. So we've gone from 20% of the workforce to over 50% of the workforce. The most popular occupations, I think you'll find this interesting, by percent of women employed in 2019 was preschool and kindergarten teachers, with 98.7% employed being women. Similarly, the most popular occupation by the number of women employed in 2019 was elementary and middle school teachers, with 2.9 million employed. The least popular occupations by percent of women in 2019 was brick masons, block masons, and stone masons, which was at 0.007% of women employed in those occupations. And the least popular occupation by the number of women employed in 2019 was structural, my tongue is tied this morning, structural iron and steel workers, with around only 600 people and women employed. In Utah, did a little homework on your state. The top 5 industry categories for women workers, surprise, surprise, educational services, healthcare, and social assistance. Probably not a surprise. 2.5 million people in that women in that category. Retail trade was at 86%. The arts, the entertainment, accommodation, and food services made up 74% women. Professional, scientific, management, administrative, and waste management services was 73,000, and finance and insurance, real estate, and rental leasing made up about 60,000 women in your state. The bottom 5 categories in Utah for women workers are transportation and warehousing, utilities, which was 21,000, IT, which was 14,000, construction, which was 12,000, and wholesale trade at 11,000. And the lowest was agriculture, forestry, fishing, hunting, and mining at 3,000. So a lot of interesting numbers that parallel the national numbers as well, but very interesting to think about non-traditional occupations for women and the types of occupations that women are continuing to go into when there's all this opportunity in these STEM fields and in mining and in manufacturing. So the Women's Bureau is really trying to help elevate that conversation right now. You've probably also heard a lot, and I think I said this on Women's Equality Day, Lisa, was a lot about inequity, inequality in salaries of women. And many of you have probably heard women are making so much less than men and how terrible that is. Well, as the director of the Women's Bureau, I started really digging in on this. And on the webinar that you listened into, Lisa, we had Christina Hoff-Summers, who talked about the wage gap. And one thing that I think is so interesting that is so rarely discussed is part-time wages. And we know that a lot of women might want to choose part-time work over full-time work in order to be home with our children, or for a variety of reasons that flexibility works better. But when you look at part-time wages, women often out-earn men when you consider total hours worked. So when workers clocked 5 to 9 hours, 10 to 14 hours, 15 to 19 hours, 20 to 24, 25 to 29, and 30 to 34 hours part-time women's earnings on average are higher than men. And this is even true for full-time workers that work 35 to 39 hours per week, where women earn on average 103.6% of men. So I'm thinking about writing an op-ed about how to help men with the wage gap issue. But in general, I just think it's so interesting as we look at part-time work, because that more to do on that. The Women's Bureau is going to keep studying the impact of it, but I really think it's an important part of the conversation. My research background tells me that it's likely due, we know more women work part-time, and we know that we might, as a woman, I know my intuition is that part-time work gave me the flexibility to help with my family needs. So more to come on that, but I thought you might find that interesting when separated that way. Women start earning less than men only when they hit 40 hours a week, and that's really unclear in the research as to why yet, but we are going to be examining that, as I've mentioned. There's a woman at the Center for American Progress that even started looking at this, and she found, I think this is another point that is so fascinating, that just a woman's willingness to work long hours, or all employees, makes employers willing to pay more. So Lisa, if you're willing to work over 40 hours and I'm your employer, I'm going to pay you more on the front end because I know I can count on you to work extra hours as it's needed. But if you tell me you can't, I'm just going to put you in that 0 to 40 category of hours per week. But it really makes your base salary higher if you're willing to work over 40 hours, which many women might not have the ability to do as freely as men, perhaps. But more to come on this, but I find it just a fascinating way to think about wages. And we're going to be taking a new approach going forward and really trying to look at deliverables and understanding the tax credit for working families, the needs of working women and moms. And one of those issues I've already touched on is childcare. And I'm assuming some of the women on the call today and in your part of your council have children. And I think it's important that we think about the access to and affordability of childcare. So the Women's Bureau has really been looking at something, much of my career I mentioned was spent in education, and I have 3 degrees in understanding developmental needs of children and working with families and being a teacher for those number of years. And then in the policy world, I thought, well, why don't employers just offer childcare benefits? I know some companies have a childcare facility on site, and that's helpful. Not many actually do that, but I can't go to work if I didn't have access to childcare. Well, I learned when I got to the Department of Labor that there is an overtime rule. So I did the homework and learned that only 11% of the employees across the United States receive the perk of childcare, meaning I will pay for your childcare if you come work at my business. And that seemed rather low to me because we offer retirement benefits, health benefits. I even know employers that offer gym memberships, but I don't see them offering me the perk of childcare, which would really help. That would make me come to your company versus the one that doesn't offer that. So I learned about this regulatory barrier that the Women's Bureau is now studying to see what happens if we remove this impact. But because of overtime rules for regular rate of pay, if I paid you, Lisa, a subsidy to pay for your child care and you worked 5 hours overtime, I have to recalculate your pay every month. If I have 1,000 employees that are getting this perk, that becomes a very cumbersome process to recalculate your overtime pay every month to adjust for this child care subsidy. So there is literally one small sentence to remove this childcare to make it exempt from those overtime rules that we're going to be studying the impact for, which I think would really help in the future of childcare, and I think would really help stabilize the childcare market as well, which is a very volatile market right now. So that's one thing that we're working on to help working families. We're also going to be examining the child care and dependent care credit At the Women's Bureau, we know that this dependent care credit allows American taxpayers to deduct child care expenses that were incurred by the parents while you're at work, but it's really limited by means testing. In fact, if you receive that benefit from your employer, you actually can lose part of the credit because you might make too much. It's based on an income level. So we're going to be studying that more and see what we can find out about expanding the work of that tax credit for working families. We're also doing a study on the database of the cost of quality in every county in the United States. So soon you'll be able to click on the state of Utah and know what childcare costs on average for the last 10 years in every county in your state, in making decisions for economic development and making decisions about where people live and making decisions about assistance for childcare in general. At the Women's Bureau, we also work on paid family leave. We just put out a request for information. It just closed in July. We put it out in July, it closed in August, and we've received several comments, and we're planning to put that forward in a report form to help expand a potential national policy for paid leave. So again, just thinking about these pathways for women, and paid leave is something that really impacts working women, working families, but working women in particular. We were able, President Trump was able to pass, or the Congress was able to pass a paid leave for federal employees that allows 12 weeks of paid parental leave, and we're hoping to expand that in the near future. But as I mentioned, the impact of COVID-19 is brand new to us, and much of the conversation that's happening about the impact on women, if you Googled right now COVID-19 and impact on women, the news looks terribly dire. I should have put some of these headlines in here about you know, how terrible it is. But when you look at the data on women, and now that I'm at the Department of Labor, the Bureau of Labor Statistics gives the data out that we use to look at the workforce and its impact on women. That data about women, and it broken down by women with children, does not become available till 2021. So any data that you're seeing about the impact on women right now is based on 2019 data. We do not know the true impact on women. That's not to say there isn't an impact, but please be cautious of what you read, because it's really not available. And if you know, we can do survey data, that's fine, but the actual numbers of women in the workforce, who's dropping out, when they're dropping out, what ages are dropping out, full-time, part-time, those with children, those with not children, won't be available until next year. So the Women's Bureau was going to be looking at that and writing about that and getting that word out as soon as those data become available. We are going to do some grant making this fiscal year for childcare facilities in light of COVID-19 that are helping in their communities. So we'll be issuing a competitive grant for that to help with school closures and assure that women are getting the help that they need that may be affected by those. And we're also going to do a broad Gallup type study of working women during this time of crisis. And one thing that I'm noticing is I see a lot of surveys about, you know, how women feel and what's happening in their lives. But I also want to look at the future. Now that we've been through this as working women, what do we want the future to look like? Do we want more flexibility to do telework like we're doing today? Do we want more flexibility to work part-time so we can care for our children? We don't want to just reverse course and restore the landscape to something that looks identical to COVID-19. There may be some really good changes that we learn from this experience. So I'm going to ask questions like, you know, for moms with young children, do you really want to go back to sending your child to a center based with 100 kids? Would you prefer family childcare? Do you need home providers that might be able to help watch your school-age children while you work? You know, we know that women currently work, as I mentioned, more part-time at twice the rate as men. Would women prefer part-time after this virus is somewhat back to normal? So all of those things will be part of our bigger study. I was told that there's women on this call that are from safety industries as diverse from from mining to water reclamation to bicycle tool manufacturing and production. And you all probably know from your work that women are less likely to be in these occupations, some by choice and others because they don't even know about these fields being open to them. So one of the grants that I think you'll find probably the most interesting is we do a Women in Apprenticeship in Non-Traditional Occupations grant. It's called the Wanto Grants. And we just awarded, I think we've done it for a number of years. We just awarded $4.1 million to different states to help women learn about these careers, enter into pre-apprenticeship models that help individuals develop the skills first, then going into an apprenticeship model. And so with the president's executive order about increasing and expanding apprenticeships, our grant is the only one I know of that's very specific to women in apprenticeships. And all of the organizations, community-based organizations we awarded, have different approaches to it, and we're studying what worked, what didn't work. And we know it in Utah, the way you might approach this would be very different than how we would approach it in DC. So it's just really important that we learn more about how to expose these women to these occupations at a younger age. How do we reach them at a time where women are going to be considering new jobs right now? If I lost my job in the hotel industry, there are plenty of good jobs right now in manufacturing and non-traditional careers and in STEM fields that women might be interested in switching to. So we want to be part of that work and really help move it forward. We also work with Job Corps. I don't know if you're familiar with Job Corps, and I didn't do my homework to see how many are in Utah, but they are in every state. And they help a lot of people, but women are also less likely to go in through a Job Corps program. So we're helping with some recruitment strategies right now to help the recruiters of Job Corps recruit more women, make it more appealing, more interesting, reaching those young people. I think it serves 16 to age 23. And I know there's women out there that would really benefit from those programs. So we're trying to help with that as well. I could go on, but I just want to kind of conclude with it. There's still more to change in the workplace for every group of people, but especially for women. And as we've progressed through the last 100 years, I'm really struck by the progress and accomplishments of women over 100 years. And my agency has focused on this from the physical safety of women. And now we've evolved to where we can actually focus on the economic progression of women. And there's an entire industry that your group represents of safety that successfully makes workplaces more safe. So you're really the women at the forefront of this industry in your state. And I think that's really a tribute to the past 100 years that you are all doing that. So I do want to thank you all for that, and that making it your career and such important work in the area of safety. So I'm excited about the future of working women. And if you go to our website or want to know more about any of those subjects I covered or any of the data, our Twitter page is at WB_DOL, and I can send you that as well, but would love to keep in touch with your organization and help be a resource to you to be able to do what you do. So I will pause there and see what's next. I can't hear anybody. Are you there? There you are.
We're a little bit slow, but no, we appreciate that. It's so fun to hear all of those great things that you've done and that the organization has done. And I know that for me, it's just so inspiring, and it makes me excited to help do a lot more. on our level too. So thank you for sharing that information.
It was a lot of info. I'm sorry about that, because when you listened in, we had 4 different people trying to highlight these ideas. So I'm sorry it seemed so much. It may have been a lot, but it's important work.
It was awesome, and we believe it's important work too. So I hope that everyone understands why I wanted to have you participate with our group too. So super good to keep that conversation going, and we're always happy to do that. So thank you for that. We did kind of open the chat to see if anybody had any questions, and there hasn't been any that came in yet, but I've got some.
Okay.
So I started kind of helping with or taking over with help what's going on with our women in safety organization when I started a new job about a year ago. And so you just kind of watching what you've done and seeing what you've done with your organization, kind of coming into a new women's organization, and then there's a pandemic and jobs change and everything's a little bit crazy, but kind of maybe what would your advice be for our group, or what's been what would you suggest that we do kind of as a group to mitigate that, or to move forward, or what's your advice for us, I guess?
So do you mean specific during COVID time, just some of the things we've experienced, or do you mean just in general a new organization?
Let's do both. Will you tell us about what things have changed for you since COVID, and maybe like how that's kind of changed things, and then maybe give us a little bit of advice, or what's your suggestion, or what do you think we should do as maybe a women in safety organization?
Well, I have to say I've been amazed about this type of thing we're doing right now, that I'm able to not have to fly to Utah, but get to talk with your group today. And in some ways, the webinar type of work that we're doing, it's not my preference. Being, in person is definitely better, but I do think some innovation and in the ways that we share information has really been, I've had to be creative. And when I send you this video about the Rosies, that was probably the highlight of our creativity of how to celebrate an event so important as to honoring these women who worked during World War II. And so we had to get videos from the White House. We had to get videos from the Rosies in California. And then putting that all together remotely, it was quite a feat. So, but it turned out really well, almost better to some extent than I think if we had all just been there in person, because these women wouldn't have been able to travel in their 90s quite as easily. So we were able to really represent the whole United States. But I do think some of the challenges, I have a team, we have 10 regional offices. I find it really difficult. I know you're all in one state, but it's really difficult to connect, on a regular basis like you are when you're in the office. So that's kind of the downfall, is trying to reach so many people without, having that personal touch or whatever. But as an organization, when I started at the Women's Bureau, I think data should drive all of our work. And I don't know enough about all that you do, but we have the data available at the Department of Labor about safety. We have contacts I can help you with in any way, with OSHA or any other organizations that can help inform the work that you do. But data is hard to argue with, and data collected by the Bureau of Labor Statistics is something I've relied heavily on. And it looks like somebody's posting some of that for me now, the Hall of Honor event in the chat room. So my suggestion would be to stick to the data as best you can, and meet the needs of your team as best you can to spread the word about the work that you do. We do a lot of policy briefings. We do a lot of social media now that we didn't do before, a lot of creativity in how we get the word out. But social media is a huge way too, that we just got our own Twitter page this year. It was like, it took us 100 years to get a Twitter page, but we got one. And we find that quite helpful to help spread the data and statistics available related to women in the workforce. And the last thing I'll say on that is kind of what I think why you reached out to me maybe, is when you go to tell a story about women in the workforce, there's two ways you can do it. You can talk about it from the accomplishment side of things, or you can talk about how terrible things are for women. And I find it, maybe it's my nature and former experience as a teacher, I find it, we can move the ball down the field, so to speak, further if we focus and start where we are instead of just this constant women aren't getting what they need, you know. Let's focus on the good and grow from there. So I try to provide the realistic facts and focus on the accomplishments.
That's great. Thank you so much. That wasn't a great way to ask the question, but very, very well put. Who has been the most interesting person that you've got to meet so far in your role?
Oh my goodness, you should have given me these questions ahead of time.
I know. Sorry.
I am trying to think, because I've had some, I'm trying to think like my daughter thinks, who sometimes thinks it's super exciting. I guess I would have to say, and this has really, this is more about my role in childcare than all the data I just shared, but Jennifer Garner, the actress, is very focused on helping in the field of childcare. And she had a meeting with her. I almost forgot my first name because I got so excited. She was Jennifer Garner, and but her passion about childcare was so helpful, and she's so down to earth that she has since texted me and called me and is in my phone. And I joke around that I call her Jen. I don't really. I just it kind of, you know, she was just someone famous that I found very fun to meet. Of course, I work with President Trump and Ivanka Trump, and I'm amazed every day at Ivanka Trump's work in the childcare space, and I feel she has really raised the bar on the awareness around the importance of childcare for working women. And I feel she's probably had the most impact on, in my 30-year career of working on the childcare part of it. All of a sudden, she's going to states and talking about it, and just because of who she is, it's really raised the bar on this topic nationally more than any other time in my career. So that's been a big impact. I feel like I'm forgetting somebody really important there. I think of who else I've met, but those two stand out to me the most.
Covered the celebrity and the presidency, so I think we're good.
We're good.
Well, thank you so much. We just appreciate what you do and what your organization does, and I can tell that your team is amazing too. And you know, it's just an honor to have you with us today, and we appreciate everything that you've been working on behalf of women, and we look forward to chatting in the future. I will keep you updated, and we'll definitely follow what's going on in your world. So we're excited to make new friends, and yeah, we will we'll follow up with you, and we will communicate with our group, and we'll share the information, the website, and we'll make sure everybody gets to see the video as well. So
yeah, that sounds good. We have several events coming up too. I'll make sure you get the links to.
great.
I'm going to do an interview with two of the Rosies from that video to talk about what it was like for them. And National Apprenticeship Week is the first week in November. So we'll be interviewing women who have benefited from our Wanto Grants that I talked about. So I'd love for you all to have access to hear those conversations, and anything that you see that we can help with, or help host a webinar for your team, or have you all be part of our panels as well. Let's just keep in touch, and maybe we can, when we're back in a real world, we can do it in person. So that would be good.
Great.
So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. We will let you get back to your busy day, and we'll kind of continue for a minute and wrap up, but we just appreciate you, and please pass on our thanks and our gratitude to your team as well.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Thank y'all.
You too.
Bye.
Okay. Jory, I saw your question, and Megan's like, Lisa, that's a big. So the grants that she's talking about, it was due in July, like, or the end of July, the first part of August. So I put on my calendar for us and for our organization, and so you know, I'm sure we'll continue to be in touch. But yeah, it's definitely a great opportunity. But we missed it by a minute this past year. And so that was frustrating as well. But I still wanted to have her come and talk to us. And I want to kind of follow that organization and kind of participate with them and be a part of that. But yeah, that's a lot of money. So I was excited about that too. Anyway, so I just wanted to, I know that was kind of a long time and I want to definitely keep it to a short hour today. I know it's a Friday morning and we've all got a lot going on, but I really, I hope that you guys see why I wanted to have her speak with us today and how cool it is that there are people that are advocating for women. And I hadn't really known much about this organization. So I hope that you enjoyed that. And I hope that she inspires you as well. And we'll continue to follow their organization with our organization. So I wanted to mention a few things so that everybody kind of knew what was going on. It's been a minute since we've been together. I think the last time we had a women in safety event was back in February. And so things have changed a little since then. So it's been crazy, but we've still kind of been working. And I wanted to just kind of talk quickly. We've made some changes. We took the opportunity while we were not having events to kind of do some organization. When I first started last year, I started in November, I met a lot of really great people, and our Women in Safety group, I had some people that reached out to me. They were helping with the award event. Joy and Candy and Naomi, Joy Glad, Candy Shankman, I struggle with your last name, Candy, every time, but Candy S. and Naomi Redez, and let me give you, I'll introduce them a little bit better, but they continued to help me and I reached out to them quite a bit. So kind of long story short, they were helping with the award event last December, and I continued to call more meetings and request their help. So they probably should have been done last year, but just like that, they became my steering committee. So we've organized things a little bit, and we just want to share that with you quickly and then tell you what's coming up. And yeah, we will do that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen quickly. All right. You can see that, guys. Okay, great. Okay, so we talked a little bit about what the Women's Bureau does, and we talk a little bit about what our vision is for our group, and this is kind of where we're at with our mission. I don't want to go through a ton of it. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but because I want Candy to tell us what's going on, but we do have a great mission, and our whole point is to help and support each other and create opportunities for career development with each other. And so that's just kind of where we're at. And I realized that was going to be kind of a lot of work. So I had Candy and Joy and Naomi help me, and we kind of came up with a plan for the next year. So I want to introduce Candy, and I'll let her kind of talk a little bit about what our plans are, what's coming up, and then I'll kind of wrap it up and we will be done for now. So Candy, I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you. Oh, you unmuted yourself. Very good. Okay, you're on.
Hi, ladies. Thanks for being with us today. So as Lisa mentioned, we've been a part of the award ceremony last year, and it was a great honor, and I had a great time and lots of fun with these gals. So although Lisa thinks we should have been finished, by the end of last year with our help, I'm still very excited that she's put this together in a more concrete, professional format that we can continue to follow for hopefully years to come when, we all kind of move away and do other things in our careers. So being a part of the steering committee has been great, and I'm looking forward to the next 2 years. But it is definitely opened after this next 2 years. It will open up and we can look for some additional volunteers. So you can kind of see here on the PowerPoint, we do have just some small qualifications. I mean, it would be nice if you are a member of the Utah Safety Council, right? And then we just want you to have some experience in safety, health, or any other kind of leadership roles. And that's basically it. So if this is something that you're interested in, currently the steering committee has 4 individuals on it. So we have the financial leader, our communications officer, the strategic planning officer, and then our engagement officer. And then along with the president of the Utah Safety Council, he does kind of approve everything for us in terms of award selections and other things. So you can, I think, move to the next slide. I just wanted to briefly talk about the Women in Safety Annual Award that we do give out. We received lots of applications back this year, and they were very detailed, and it was amazing, and it was very, very hard to choose who we are going to award coming up in December. But overall, I think a lot of you have already probably seen the application. We did change it up a little bit to give a little more description of what we are actually looking for in terms of an application. And the responses we received back were great. So I think the award application and the updates we made did its job. But as I mentioned, the award candidate is selected, by our steering committee. We have a process that we kind of go through and rate individuals. And then of course we have the vice president of operations or the president of the Utah Safety Council go ahead and give us the final approval. Where there's 4 of us, we might need a tiebreaker. So that's kind of how the actual award process and selection process goes. Does anybody have any questions on that? I just wanted to take a minute to kind of describe that, because I feel like it really hasn't been described to our group before of how that whole process works. So if not, we'll move on to the last thing. I just want to let you know what we have planned for 2021 and then for our next event. So we did decide we will hold 6 events each year, hopefully in person, of course, depending on other circumstances that we can't predict, right? Such as our coronavirus we have going on right now. But we will hold these bi-monthly. So our next event is going to be our awards event, and that, for the time being, is scheduled for December 10th. So if you want to mark that on your calendars, we'd love to have you attend. And of course, we'll get more details of location and other things here in the next few weeks. But for next year, we'll probably start in February with our first event for 2020. So these are the topics we have laid out for our bi-monthly focus. And we got these from, we did a survey request a few months ago, and a lot of these were built by some of the responses you guys gave back to us, and then just other feedback from past events from you ladies coming up and just giving us suggestions and other things of how this group would be beneficial to you. So first and foremost, it's always important to network with each other so we get a better relationship and get to better know each other. So when we do have questions in the future, and say for, Naomi, if I have a construction related safety question, just knowing her maybe more on a personal basis would make me feel a little more comfortable reaching out to her and asking her that question. The other topics, we want to work on professional development. So this would be like promoting yourself or just promoting your career. So what's the latest in building a resume? What types of safety qualifications are new and I should have if I want to move up in the safety field? Okay. And then just new developments in safety leadership for women. So how can I be a great leader as a woman in the safety department, right? Kind of how our guest was mentioning, safety is usually a more male dominant field, right? Versus female. So it's kind of hard to get our word out to a male dominant area being a female. So that's something we definitely want to work on. And then of course, safety resources is always important. What's new out there? Who can, or how can that help me in my job, in my field? And we also want to be a big part of the community. So with our Women in Safety organization, we always want to give back, right, to our community. So we'll do something positive and impactful so that we can kind of pay it forward and just get our name out there a little bit more in our community. And then last but not least is going to be our inspired category. So we're going to honor a woman in safety in December annually, kind of moving forward from here. So that's really important too. It's fun to see how us in the group can grow and learn and just do amazing things in not only your work field, but in your community field, right? This all kind of trickles down to even things we do at home to keep people safe, you know, safety measures. So that's kind of what we have laid out for 2021. Does anybody, I mean, I'm definitely welcome if you've got some speakers you have in mind for any of these type of topics that you think would be amazing to have for next year. Don't hesitate to reach out. We want to hear the ideas that you have as well. So, or people that you're connected with that you feel would, you know, make a great event for us next year. So, and I think that's all I have. Thank you again for being here, and we totally appreciate you, and we're looking so forward to having a great 2021.
Thank you, Candy. I appreciate that. Ooh, I keep kicking my camera. I'm sorry. So like Candy mentioned, you know, we've got a lot of amazing stuff planned for the next year. So here's kind of what we want to ask of you. We are going to put our group onto LinkedIn. So I think maybe in the next month or two, we'll have a contest as well on LinkedIn, but we're going to be sharing information and via LinkedIn. And so we created a group and we will try and start reaching out to people on that from that group. So if you are a LinkedIn person, or even if you're not, go ahead and try and find us and we'll try and find you, and then we'll do a contest. So we're excited to start kind of using that as a platform. We decided we were gonna just go with one thing, and that was kind of it. We will still send out our emails though from Utah Safety